You're listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Vinay, for those who haven't come across you online, introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we're talking about today.
My name is Vinay Eapen. I'm the specialty pharmacy supervisor at the University of Texas Medical Branch, and I'm here today to talk about specialty pharmacy and how I've been able to help an institution start a specialty pharmacy program in the midst of PBM network exclusions and all the different hurdles.
PBMs. They don't even want you guys as a hospital to break into the specialty market?
Of course not, Mike. You know how PBMs are. Whenever there's profit margins to be made, PBMs try to exclude pharmacies such as ourselves as a small player in this huge market from filling prescriptions for these patients. So it is definitely one of the major pain points in having a specialty pharmacy program.
So they say specialty, and they never come out and just say, we want all the expensive medicines where there's profit still. Instead, they call it specialty. I know there's reasons, but that part right there irks me that they're not even calling it what it is.
That's actually an interesting point in a discussion that a lot of people have, right? There's no universal definition for specialty pharmacy. Every PBM, every entity has their own list of medications that they deem special. For the most part, there's a comprehensive list, but every PBM, if they make money on it, it'll be a specialty drug.
When you talk to the specialty people, they don't want to admit price. They want to admit that all of this stuff needs a lot more hand-holding. And unfortunately, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. It's like pharmacies probably don't do as much hand-holding for the drug, these expensive ones, but it's kind of because the PBM and the insurances have taken the time away from the pharmacies to be doing this. Now, granted, some pharmacies were not maybe doing it at all. And it's kind of the chicken and the egg, how the specialty kind of got away from the little guy.
No, that's very true, Mike. And you're right. Most pharmacies these days, they're overwhelmed with the volume they have to complete just to make the small margins that they do, that they don't have some of the time that it takes to get a specialty prescription filled for a patient. And to really identify that, you kind of have to know the workflow for a specialty script, right? We call it the patient specialty journey. When a patient is seen by a specialist and prescribed a medication that's deemed a specialty medication, there's multiple pain points prior to that medication getting to the patient, right? PBMs will have cost control measures like a prior authorization where, that prescription is sent to the pharmacy will adjudicate the claim and realize there's a prior authorization that's involved. They'll then fax that back to the doctor's office, and then the doctor will have to get started on the prior authorization. And there's a huge coordination of care that's involved, right? And that's where, when I came into this health system, I realized, that's kind of what we have. That's our unique position that we have. That's an advantage over some of the PBMs and independent pharmacies, right? We have the resources. We have a shared electronic medical record. That's just one of the pain points, right? After you have a patient who's approved for therapy, guess what? Specialty medications are not cheap for customers or patients, right? They're usually really expensive. So patient copay assistance and financial assistance is important. In our health system, we have resources. We have a team of pharmacy technicians who are there to look for different resources and grants and fund money that's available to help bring that patient copay down.
What you're saying to me, Vinay, it sounds noble, but here's the problem. The PBMs obfuscate that stuff on purpose with the smoke and mirrors, but the PBM makes money by selling these drugs. They have to make it look difficult. Here's the problem. The PBMs, they own these specialty pharmacies. You got to follow the money.
Yeah, if you look at 70 to 85% of the prescription claims that are processed in this country, they're done through three of the major PBMs, Optum, ESI, and CVS Caremark. So they control a huge part of the market. And like you were saying, yes, these are hurdles that were placed by these PBMs to kind of get the little guy out of there and make it as difficult as possible and to weed out, regular pharmacies from filling these prescriptions.
But they weed them into their pharmacy because they own, do I have that right? They own specialty pharmacies?
Yes, there's been a whole lot of consolidation and vertical integration that's occurred in the last 10 years, where you have CVS, Caremark, and Aetna merger, and they have their own specialty pharmacy. Guess what? CVS Caremark processes 30 to 40% of the prescription claims in America, right? So, of course, they want their patients to go through their specialty pharmacy so they can profit, from the dispensation of that prescription and also help control their cost on their end.
It doesn't seem right when they can stop it. What's the fancy word for that? Not letting a pharmacy do it.
We call it payer lockouts, or you can call it network exclusions, where, a patient is mandated to use the pharmacy chosen by the PBM. It really doesn't sound lawful or ethical, but it's the current state that we're in.
The only hope of a pharmacist working with these more deluxe medicines is to be in a situation like you, because the average independent pharmacy doesn't have them, but the average chain pharmacist isn't dealing with these either?
For the most part, most of these major chains, they have their own specialty pharmacy, Walgreens, CVS. So most of those prescriptions go to an external specialty pharmacy in another state, still under the Walgreens, CVS umbrella, but, it's not handled at the brick and mortar stores for the most part.
Vinay, if you were in charge of this, if you were in charge of these actual medicines, you were paying for them, in your opinion, are these not going to be done correctly in the average community setting?
No, I would not say that. There's a lot of good retail pharmacies, a lot of good clinical pharmacists who are retail pharmacists that could manage these patients. I will say there are a lot of hurdles that exist in that specialty pharmacy journey that I kind of alluded to in the beginning, which makes it extremely hard for these regular pharmacies to kind of fulfill that prescription for the patient. The other thing is a lot of these drugs can't just be bought on any wholesaler account, right? They're restricted. You have to get accredited as a specialty pharmacy to have access to a third of the specialty medications that are available these days. So there's another extra layer of obstacles that are out there.
Oh, so even if you wanted to take the chance of billing something or whatever, a lot of the pharmacies, you can't even get a hold of these drugs. They're not even open to you with the wholesaler?
Exactly. They're called limited distribution drugs. And if you look at oncology, you have a lot of new medications that are coming out that are oral medications to treat oncology. Before they were infused drugs. Now, with patient convenience and treatment outcomes, a lot of the drug companies are making oral medications available for the patient. In that, not every pharmacy has access to order that medication for their patients. They're called limited distribution drugs, and the manufacturer intentionally limits which pharmacies can dispense these medications.
Vinay, but you're telling me that an oral medicine is also a specialty drug?
Yes, correct. We have a lot of oral medications, that are specialty drugs. The hepatitis C space.
How is that special?
Yeah, that's very true. So for hepatitis C, in 2014, we saw the, revolution of how patients with hepatitis C were treated. Previous to the newer drugs that came out that were able to cure these patients of hep C, we had infusion medications, right? A lot of side effects. Expensive and not very effective. And in 2014, we had newer oral meds come out that completely eradicated the virus from your body. And these are oral medications, right? They cost patients, not patients, but, just in general, they were $80,000 a regimen, right? These are oral specialty drugs that a patient took for 8 weeks and that virus were cleared from their system. So, you have a huge shift in oral and a lot of biologic medications that are specialty.
But all I'm hearing from you is that's an expensive medicine that they want to make profit on. It sounds like there's nothing to it. I mean, not that there's nothing to pharmacy, but it sounds like an oral medicine. Why is that special? Why is that taken away from we regular folk if it's not just financial? That sounds just financial.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great question. And that's, so the integrated care model I was alluding to at the beginning of the call. So, you have the first pain point, which is prior authorizations and financial assistance. And that's getting the patient started on therapy,
Sure.
So once you've got the patient started on therapy, you need more follow-up care, right? So we're talking more touch points, adherence checks. A lot of these new specialty drugs, especially in the oncology space, patients have a lot of side effects where they need a pharmacist who, with us, we have clinic pharmacists embedded in clinics who reach out to these patients and see how they're doing on their medication, especially in someone who started a new medication, right? And needs to know, hey, I'm having this side effect. Is this normal? We have a 24/7 access to a clinical pharmacist who can answer those questions for that patient, right? These are drugs that have a huge side effect profile that need to be managed more closely than a regular medicine.
Devil's advocate. Those side effects show up with medicines that are also 50 cents a tablet. But because this is so damn expensive, they want to follow up with those side effects so one of these doesn't just end up in the trash or put down the toilet. Are there a lot more side effects, or do you think it's what I said? Because it's financial, they don't want someone to give up so easily?
I think that there's a little bit of both. You're right. Since they're financially lucrative, they want to obviously limit who dispenses these medications. Secondly, these are medications that, narrow therapeutic windows, treat a very complex condition. These are disease states that really drive up the health spend for a plan, right? So they want these patients followed very carefully on a month-to-month basis.
Yeah. There's no chance in hell of an independent pharmacy doing specialty. I mean, has that been pulled from every independent pharmacy, do you think?
I think for the most part, with these drugs being so expensive and DIR fees.
Who'd want them?
Yep. Specialty drugs, guess what? PBMs, once you start dispensing specialty drugs, you're on their radar. So guess what? The clawbacks start happening. The audits start happening, right? In my pharmacy in general, we get more audits now that we've dispensed more specialty drugs, DIR fees, things that we have to be aware of, because, in order for us to be successful and take care of our patients, we do have to be financially viable. And that's, one of the pain points.
One of my guests, we were talking about selling a pharmacy, and boy, you sell a pharmacy and 6 years later with the cost of these medicines, you could have an audit that could rip into your profit from that. I can't imagine some of these specialty prices with the audits and things like that.
Oh no, definitely. We get audits weekly, on simple things, right? They just, PBMs wanting to know how you've dispensed a medication. If you put in, the dispense quantity correctly, if you billed correctly, they try to catch you on every little thing, so it's very important to have a staff that is trained in processing prescriptions and being compliant. That's definitely a plus.
Vinay, do they want you as a pharmacy, or are they trying to get rid of you?
Mike, sometimes I wonder if they even want us existing. But for us, at least, we feel like we have a higher calling, right? We have patients to take care of. We know our model is better than the PBM's model, right? So, this is it's a struggle every day to stay open and to take care of our patients. But I believe it's a battle that's worth it.
Put yourself in their shoes, though. Why don't they just get rid of you guys? I mean, they got rid of the independents. Why don't they get rid of you guys so they can take that profit? I wonder what's in it for them to even allow you in a health system to be specialty. What do you think's in it for them, for you to do it and not just say, screw all the little people? I'm not that you're as little as, the independents, but why do they even allow you in it, do you think?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that integrated care model. So if you look at a health plan and them trying to control their cost and the patients that they manage, if you have a pharmacy model or a model that really looks at value-based care and taking care of patients on a month-to-month basis, making sure patients are adherent to therapy, making sure co-pays are affordable and patients staying compliant on medicine, I think that's a huge part of what we can do.
You might help keep their costs down.
Correct.
They might see some value in having you local with the local people.
Exactly.
All right, so Vinay, you came from a retail world, and as I understand it, you then joined this health system, and one of the first things your manager did is gave you a pile of crap and said, Vinay, figure this out, how we can get into specialty? Was that his question?
Yeah. As you were saying, I started off as a retail pharmacist, 4 or 5 years in, loved it, loved the customer base, I joined pharmacy when the model was really shifting to more clinical services, giving vaccines, doing MTMs, and then 5 years in, had that itch. I wanted to see what else was out there. And I saw the writing on the wall with the pharmacy reimbursement model and how pharmacists were having to struggle with that.
Were you doing the MTMs and that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. MTMs, vaccinations, doing everything, wearing multiple hats, right? Every retail pharmacist can at least relate to that. You wear multiple hats, you manage a team, you have metrics that you have to meet, So, at one point I was like, I want to change, right? And, this opportunity happened.
Why? Monotony?
I think it's important to grow, to see what you can do, because we do have a valuable skill set, right? So the one thing a health system, a major academic health system doesn't have is they don't know people who understand retail pharmacy and understand how to process prescriptions, how to grow a business. I think that's something that's, retail pharmacists inherently know. They know how to grow a customer base. They know how to make patients satisfied. They know the pharmacy reconciliation part, the DIR fees. We're experts in that. So I was able to bring that piece of expertise into this new landscape with health system.
When you say health system, I'm picturing like a big hospital campus, like 1 square mile or something. Is that right? Or is your health system like across a state or city or something?
No, well, we have clinics all across the state of Texas, Mike, but you're right. It's a health system that has multiple campuses. We have a main hospital in Galveston, Texas, and then we have, satellite locations spread throughout Houston. It's a 635 bed hospital, huge patient population, a lot of ambulatory clinics where a lot of the specialty scripts originate from.
Is health system is that like a newfangled name for what used to be called just a hospital and all the little things that go along with a hospital?
Yeah, it's a fancy word for hospital, I guess you could say.
It's not like a fancy word for like an HMO system. It's more like a fancy word for hospital.
Hospital, exactly.
And just like a hospital would then branch out to other things, so does the health system.
Correct.
So Vinay, you were brought in as the pharmacist in their outpatient pharmacy?
Correct. A specialty pharmacy supervisor where, the whole goal for the health system was to grow their outpatient program. Retail pharmacy, right? We call it outpatient pharmacy in the healthcare system, but they wanted to grow that customer base. So if you look at a hospital, you have patients who are admitted into the hospital and leave the hospital. So we have a meds to beds program where that patient, is seen by our doctors and our clinicians. Once they leave the hospital, we get their prescriptions ready in our pharmacy, deliver it to that patient. That's one of the services we offer, along with specialty pharmaceuticals, right? We have a lot of our UTMB specialists who prescribe a lot of specialty drugs. A lot of that care prior to us being in existence was fragmented. You had external pharmacies filling it, doctors not knowing if their patients picked up their medications, a lot of back and forth, a lot of insurance haggles, So with us coming in, our strategy was to help this health system build a specialty pharmacy, coordinate doctors into understanding all the services we offer, what we can do for the patient, and really building a patient-centered specialty pharmacy was really our ultimate end goal.
As your outpatient pharmacy, and not counting the specialty, but just the regular medicine, were there some people then that came back for refills, or did most of the refills go to the retail pharmacies?
A lot of our patients, come in the hospitals, they have existing pharmacies. So, most of the time when you're in a hospital, you get a 30-day fill. And then after that 30 days, the expectation is you go see your primary care provider or your specialist that was referred for follow-up care. So you get the 30 days in our meds to beds program. With our specialty drugs, we take care of patients on a continuous basis. So there's that continuity of care.
They're longer customers.
Yes.
It's a profit game.
Yeah, I mean,
they're longer customers,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And no problem with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a way of us advertising our services and building brand loyalty. If you look at, these are patients who come to our hospital floors. Why not engage them and tell them what we can do,
How many different pharmacies then are in the health system?
Yeah, we have 3 outpatient pharmacies currently, and we're looking to build a 4th one, in this new year.
Is one of them like the mothership kind of, or are they all like equal size and things like that.
You could say that. One of them is a specialty pharmacy, and that's the one that I manage. The other ones are, take care of the meds to beds patients and clinic patients who come in through our floors.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a fairly young program, so that's the kind of nice part, right? We're organically growing this retail pharmacy program, and coming from retail space, I know the pros and cons, right? So I took what I valued in a retail setting and hoping to build off of that here in the outpatient pharmacy world.
Who owns a health system like that? Are those nonprofits?
Yes, they are nonprofits owned by the state of Texas, actually.
Owned by the state of Texas.
Yes, our health system is an academic health center that, is technically owned by the state of Texas and taxpayers.
So the money part of it, it helps the whole system. I guess you could argue it helps everybody with the taxes. And if you can keep the profit away from the PBMs.
Yes, exactly. That's always a plus.
Do you have to deal with the PBMs at all?
Oh, of course.
When you set this up, did you have to kiss their ring or anything like that to get permission for this? Or was it it was your right, sort of?
For the most part, what we've done, we've been open for about 1.5 years, and we've went after open distribution drugs. These are drugs that are available to any pharmacy.
Gotcha.
The other layer that our specialty pharmacy program is, we're a 340B entity, right? So we get drugs at a discounted rate. So, we're at an advantage from a purchasing standpoint for these drugs, where most independent pharmacies would have to buy this drug, at a higher price than us.
Is a specialty drug in the 340B also?
Correct. It is.
I'd love to have that.
Yeah. Me coming from the retail space and seeing some of the prices for these drugs, it was definitely, eye-opening to see how cheap some of these drugs are. But if you look at, the institution we're at, 340B covered entities, they take care of an indigent patient population. So, you have patients who are unfunded or Medicaid, or lower income that you're able to really help out.
I've decided that we're not going to buy a lot better at the pharmacy, so I'm going to try to save money on my wages. I'm trying to hire a bunch of Catholic nuns.
Yeah, that may be your secret sauce.
We went to Catholic schools, and back in the day, you never paid them. They worked for a penny a week or something like that, and it wasn't fair, but it was done nonetheless. So I'm trying to find some nuns. They're hard to find, though. All right, now you broach this subject, the 340B. I've got some people that own a 340B consulting firm or something, and I'm like, I'm not bringing you on, because one of my goals is always to have the guest show in a good light. And that's why I can't have a PBM person on, and I don't think I can have a PSO person on, and I don't think I'm doing very well with the big wholesalers either. Although someone was on a couple weeks ago from one of the wholesalers. But you're a good one to talk to, because you're not pushing it. You're just part of it. Do I have this right? The 340B, I kind of understand it. It gets the medicine out maybe from the, the inpatient bed stuff, all that, where it's happening in the hospital, gets it out into the community. And some of these pharmacies are in the community where the government wants to give them less expensive medicines. I'm not sure if I have that right. And also, what I don't know is, how is this system, why does it have such a bad name? How is it being abused?
That's a good question. You're right. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors around the whole 340B space right now. Initially, the intention of the 340B drug program in 1992 was to, stretch scarce resources to help covered entities that take care of an indigent patient population and getting them access to drugs. But if you look at how many contract pharmacies that every pharmacy has, it's Walgreens, CVS with 3,000, 4,000. They're taking care of a patient population that they never really manage. They're just dispensing the medication to that patient. And they're not even close to where that patient lives. So it's a mail order type deal.
I got you. So part of the 340B is you're supposed to be giving the medicine out, and also the person should be in your area because you're seeing how they're doing, maybe take their blood pressure, say hi, and all this kind of stuff. They're getting all the profit, but they're just mailing it in.
Exactly. There's no continuity of care. There's no checkpoints. There's not that white glove service that you have when you see a patient on a month-to-month basis. It's just, mailing that patient the medication and saying, hey, you're providing access to care.
Yeah. Interesting. I was home for 3, 4, 5 years before COVID. I wasn't in the pharmacy all that much, and we had some staffing changes then a couple of years ago, and it happened to line up with COVID. But boy, for a while there, I was starting to question what value we give as a community pharmacy. And I'm not saying we get paid for that value, but going back into the pharmacy and seeing the people that needed our care, especially during COVID, and a lot of it is the poor and the elderly, and those are the people that can't hop on their phone as easily and their computer to order things from these places far away. And there's a huge benefit to that local touch, I think.
Exactly. No, I agree. That intimate phone call you have with the pharmacist or pharmacy staff member, the rapport that you build with your customer base is important. You don't really see that, when you have a huge mail order pharmacy in another state where you can follow a patient, on a month-to-month basis and see how they're doing. That touch point is really important. And I think that, carries over in their care.
As I think about the dominance by the PBMs and all this, it's especially the vertical integration. It's sad because the people that buy the insurance, a local company, let's say there's a 500 employee company in your town there in Texas, they don't know how the PBM is treating this whole specialty thing. They have no idea. I mean, they're not asking those questions between the 3 or 4 different insurances. They're just not asking. Let's say it's a car salesman or something. They're just buying an insurance and they're going along with what the PBM has set up as far as specialty and all that. And it kind of makes me question, like, who's watching these people? And maybe it's not till a bunch of people die and it's on the news before somebody says, oh, we're with that company, maybe we should switch. And it's not Scout's Honor, because damn well the PBMs are way past Scout's Honor. I mean, that's not going to work. You just wonder who's watching all this.
Yeah, there's definitely no watchdogs in that market. If you look at some of the major PBMs, they're Fortune 500 companies. They know what they're doing. But you're right, that local health plan, their local employer has no idea, right? The true intention of a PBM and its inception was to drive down cost and to ultimately bring down patient costs. And, we both know it. We have pharmacies we operate and manage that hasn't been the case. So there's definitely been, a lot of litigation and, PBM's exploitation of this, in the news. I think we as pharmacists and pharmacy has kind of put them at the forefront, and, you're starting to see more notoriety around that.
As I'm talking to you here, I've talked to a lot of leaders. You're a leader. You're either going to be an administrator somewhere or you're going to own your own business. Which one is it going to be?
You know what, Mike? I think I want to start a podcast with you. There's some interesting topics out there. I think, we need to do that. But, if I had to choose between the two, I think there's something to be said of being a leader.
Yeah.
A lot of times you're put in positions to be a leader, but you don't know what you're doing.
That defines me. I'm in a leadership position. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Sometimes you kind of psych yourself out. You don't think you're ready, but leadership is learning about managing people over time. The new experiences, you learn more. It's not something that you're born with. I don't believe in that. I believe it's something that you invest in yourself, you invest in your people, you provide them mission-driven work, and that's the true calling of a leader.
All right, so Vinay, what are you actually going to be doing in 10 years, maybe 15 years? Are you going to be where you are now? Are you going to be up the ranks of the hospital/health system? Are you going to be the president of your business doing something?
In a perfect world, I'd be CEO of a healthcare company.
Are we going to do this? Are you going to go through these different ranks and move around the country, and pretty soon you're the CEO of one of them?
Exactly. You nailed it. That's the ultimate plan.
That is the ultimate plan.
Yeah, definitely. Like being a CEO of a healthcare company that's really trying to change the patient delivery model. I think there's a lot of innovation in healthcare right now. So,
Yeah.
if I had to pick where I see myself in 10 years, I think it's that.
Let's say you're sitting in a CEO role, let's say 20 years from now. As you look back from 2042, looking back, what big break would be needed to have you in the CEO seat, if anything? Or is it just a straight slope up to the leadership position?
There's definitely detours, Mike, but I would say there's 3 buckets are your experiences. What have you done previously, right, on your resume? Secondly, it's the networking tool. Who have you worked with? Who have you made an impression on that can say, hey, that guy can really do some stuff for our healthcare system or our company? And the third thing is advanced degrees. They definitely help. For us, we're all clinicians. We're pharmacists. We definitely know the clinical side of pharmacy. Now, do you know the business side? How do you increase the bottom line of an institution or an organization? That's important, right? For us to be financially viable, clinical stuff is important along with the business side. And understanding that and kind of bridging that gap is equally as important.
Well, I was trying to let you down gently by not saying you needed a business degree, but I'll ask it now since you brought it up. You don't have a business degree.
I don't.
Are you going to get one?
It is something definitely in my pursuit. I definitely do want an MBA just, to have a different lens and to, work with other people in an MBA program. You're working with nurses, engineers, doctors, it's not just healthcare providers. So I think it's important to see problems from a different set of lenses.
Is that practical? I mean, in your lifestyle right now, would that be practical to do this?
You'd have to ask my wife, Mike. I'm married, have 2 little kids. So, there's not a lot of free time, you know, but I think anytime you have your mindset on something, you'll find ways. If it's really important to you, you'll find time to do it, So we shall see.
All right. So you've thought of the MBA.
Definitely have thought of an MBA. Yep. I think it is something that, if you're looking to advance your career and move up in an administration, I think it is something that is looked upon favorably that, I would definitely recommend.
I bet it's easier though now with video and there's always been like night classes and stuff, but now you can probably do it in your pajamas at home, right? There's probably more video stuff for those programs.
Exactly. There's a lot of online programs available, I think, to make it readily accessible and easier for someone who's working 9 to 5.
And you get the hospital to pay for it.
Exactly.
What career path would you have made if you were not allowed to go into pharmacy?
I think I would have been a doctor. I grew up with a lot of family members who became doctors, and I see the lifestyle and the care and the knowledge base that they have. And if I wasn't a pharmacist, I would have been a clinician, but, I didn't think I had what it took to be a doctor. So, I said, hey, pharmacy, there's no blood. There's, very limited patient contact, like touching wise, it's more, managing, it's making an impact a different way, managing a patient's drug therapy and, still having that patient interaction, just not as intimate, I guess.
When I was in college, I remember talking to some people and they said, I maybe asked the same question. Well, I asked it more specifically. I'm like, well, why didn't you go to med school? And they would say, we don't like the blood and stuff like that. And inside of me, I'm thinking, bullcrap, you weren't smart enough. That's what I'm thinking inside. That's what I'm thinking inside of me.
But that sounds better, the blood.
That's just me. That's what I'm thinking about them, because I'm thinking the most negative thing I can on this person who says they should have gone to med school. But when I think about dentistry, like if someone asked me, how come you didn't go be a dentist? And if I said, I don't like the sound of the teeth cracking with pliers and things like that, it's like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And I'm not smart enough to do these things. As I think back, I guess all of them weren't full of crap. I guess maybe they didn't like the blood and stuff. But yeah, because if I had to do teeth stuff, it's like, no way.
You're right. Me and my friends always talk about that. Dentistry pays really well. It's really lucrative. But the downside to that is, you're seeing a patient's mouth all day. And I don't know if I could, swallow that, right? Like that's a lot.
It's the highest suicide profession.
Exactly.
Do you know that too?
Okay, that's true.
Have you heard that?
Yep, I knew that. Yep, I've seen that. I'm like, go figure.
Oh, they get like bad necks and they're in someone's mouth all the time.
Weird position all the time.
Weird position. Can you imagine going in some people's mouth,
Yeah. For 8 hours. Yeah. It's not very appealing, right?
No.
And the dentist school is not very, it's very expensive too. So there's that.
Yeah.
You only really see your return on investment after you paid off those student loans, right? So.
But, medicine's the same way, right? But I don't know. I'm not sure why it is,
Exactly.
but I've heard that before. All right, so Vinay, what if it wasn't medical, though? Then what road would you have taken?
I probably would have done something in business. I like growing a business. I like, the one thing that my job has allowed me to do now is look at P&L statements, look at our cash flow. Are we getting, learning accounting principles, which I would have never seen, at my previous job or anything, but kind of learning the behind the scenes. So the business side is really important, I think. Looking, growing a company from scratch organically, and seeing the return on your investment after, making different additions. I think that's just really appealing to me. So I could really see myself going into a business degree or pursuing a business degree.
You got a lot of leadership things there because, like I say, I've talked to a lot of them and I see a lot of that in you. So someday I'll swing down to Texas and you can invite me up to your corner office and we'll have tea or something, whatever they do in Texas there.
Of course, Mike. I'm a huge coffee connoisseur, so definitely will enjoy a good cup of coffee and have some good talk. But this has been great. Thanks for the opportunity, to have some really good conversation here. I've kind of introduced all my friends to your podcast too, so hopefully. You've definitely changed, I feel like, pharmacy for a lot of people, opening our eyes and, just keeping us engaged. That's important.
What I love about the podcast, the whole setup is a lot of times in pharmacy, we're either reading the negative stuff or you've got a few upper percent of people who have done something pretty cool and they're talking about the positive, but it's really cool in the long form just to talk about the negative and the positive together. And it's like some of this, some of that, and not paint it too rosy, but still show some hope, So it's a cool way to take time with people and get the full scoop on things.
Yep. Realistic outlook. Mike, do you go to any of these conferences where, pre-pandemic, where are you pretty plugged in with, because, the guests you have on, you have a very extensive network of people. So, like you're an independent pharmacy owner, but you don't just have independent pharmacy guests on. You have people from the whole spectrum, that's what I like, like 1 week it's, hey, cash basis accounting, or 1 week it's PBMs. 1 week it's talking to Gordon Vansco from Panther RX. It's crazy. It's an eclectic group.
I don't go to many of those, just running the store. And I used to go to more, but my family's just getting to the age now where I can get away more now. So I think it'd be cool to go to some of them. I think the guests, when you do send someone an invite, it kind of snowballs, because I'm assuming that most people I invite then look back at your role of people that you've had, and then if you start building that, I think people look back and they say, well, if he's on there, then maybe I can be on there. So I think it kind of snowballs up in a pretty cool way.
I agree.
Now you're one of them. Now people are going to look back and say, hell, if Vinay's on there, I better get on there too, just to keep up with him.
Yeah, I know, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, I put it as my to-do list. You wouldn't believe this, Mike. I told myself, I was going to, get a position within my organization, and I wanted to be on your podcast. I put it on my radar as one of those.
Oh, that's awesome. For sure.
You made it happen. So,
Years ago, I was thinking of expanding my pharmacies. I'm always balanced between, am I going to sell or am I going to buy some more? And someone told me, they said, Mike, go around to the 3 or 4 pharmacies you're interested in and tell them you're interested. And I was like, hell no, that's embarrassing. They're going to, even though I know them, they're going to say, why are you asking me? And who do you think you are for this or that? And I said, I'm not going to ask them. And I wasn't on the brink of asking them, but I thought, I could. I tell you, within like 3 to 5 years, they were all sold.
Yep.
Someone else did that and things change, But the point of that story is there's so many things that you can do by just asking.
I think put your pride away and just say, hey, I love your podcast. I love the listeners. Like, I want to be part of it, And I think I have a good story to tell.
There was one guy, I forget who it was, some podcaster. He was trying to work on his assertiveness, and he was going to do 100 things where he was told no. He needed to be told no 100 days in a row in order to learn rejection. And one of his first ones was, I think he went to McDonald's and he went up and he asked if he could have a refill on his hamburger. You got better chance coming on this show than a refill on a hamburger. And now I know, Vinay, I know that I've got 2 listeners now. I know I've got you and my black lab.
Yeah. I think you have more than that, Mike.
So I'm on cloud 9 tonight with that knowledge. Well, Vinay, great to have you on. We'll be following.
Mike, thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to come on your show and really, tell my story with specialty pharmacy.
All right. Thanks, Vinay. Take care.
Perfect, Mike. Thank you so much. Take care, okay?
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.